you to this I'm very delighted to welcome you to this special event on diversifying the economy to build the resilience of our Hawaii small businesses. Just a couple of housekeeping rules as we get started. You'll notice that this is not a webinar, rather it is a meeting Zoom room, and that's on purpose. We want to ensure that we actually get to know you, get to see you. So we do ask that you keep yourselves on mute during the presentations, but do turn on your cameras if you can. So again, we can get to know you and see you. We also invite you to introduce yourselves and ask questions in the chat box. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And so please do include your name, your organization as it appears on your screen, but also introduce yourself in the chat box and tell us what brought you here today. What about this topic is really interesting to you? What prompted you to join us? We have a full agenda, so let's go ahead and get started. And as you can see on the agenda, we do have a number of presentations, some remarks, as well as a panel discussion. And again, we want you to be engaged in that through the chat box. So please do ask your questions. And now I just want to briefly introduce myself. Again, I'm Anna Marie Cruz. I'm the Western Regional Manager for the Inner City Capital Connections program at Icic. Who is Icsc and what is Iccc? Icsc is the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City. We are a national nonprofit based in Boston, and we have a mission to drive inclusive prosperity in under-resourced and underinvested communities through research and programming. And our mission is to narrow the racial wealth gap. Iccc, or Inner City Capital Connections, is our tuition-free program designed by Icisc to help our businesses, especially during this difficult time, to not only build capacity, but also resiliency for long-term and sustainable growth. At Icisc, we also offer other programs, including a food cluster called Cultivate Small Business, our national 10,000 small business program in partnership with Goldman Sachs. We also recognize the fastest growing businesses in under-resourced communities through our annual recognition, Inner City 100, all that brought together by our alumni network. So you can imagine that one of the benefits for small businesses is to be plugged into this network. Great news, the Iccc Hawaii program will be here again this summer. August 16th and 18th will be our opening seminar, and the Iccc program, for those of you who don't already know, is a flexible and self-paced MBA or management and leadership program offered to small business entrepreneurs across the entire state of Hawaii. We begin with an opening seminar. These are live sessions, trainings offered by professors who also have entrepreneurship experience. And then we also have one-on-one coaching, digital learning, which are topic specific and timely webinars and workshops, as well as our evergreen content. And then we bring together all of our participants this year from across 22 markets at our annual conference. Some of the program takeaways are business recovery strategies, those pivots, capital solutions, community building, and one-on-one coaching. And I just want to stress the importance that we bring to the executive owner, that all these resources are focused on them. Finally, what are the program criteria? Of course, we want to ensure that our businesses are matched with the right resource. So I also want to note that while we're not the program for everyone, we work with partners both locally in Hawaii as well as other markets to ensure that we're matching our businesses with, again, the right resources. A couple of things: we do require businesses to be past the startup phase, and we look at revenues from the last 3 years, one of which should be at least 100 to 150,000 in annual revenue. And I mentioned we are accepting applications, so this is just a quick plug. Please do nominate or consider applying for the program. This Friday is actually our nomination deadline, and our application deadline is July 22nd. So that is a little bit about the Iccc program. Now for official welcome remarks, I am very pleased to introduce to you our CEO at Icisc, who is such a dedicated advocate for our small businesses. He currently serves on the SBA, or Small Business Administration Council on Underserved Communities. He ran his own small business in the past, and Not to mention, he was also the Massachusetts state treasurer. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna Marie, and so grateful for your leadership today and every day. Not only do you serve as our Western Regional Manager, but you're a key member of our management team. Most everything that happens is good is something you have a strong hand in. I also want to acknowledge our colleague Laura Kwan, who's with us today, who will be part of our cohort that, as Anna Marie said, will kick off on August 16th and 18th virtually. I want to start with, and by the way, you'll all get a copy of the deck we're using, I believe, after this session. So if you see things along the way that you are scribbling notes about, you're going to get it all. So don't worry if you missed anything. You'll be getting the deck later this week before the holiday. Let me start by acknowledging our dear friends at Kaiser Permanente in Hawaii. They have been principal sponsors of this program since we brought it to Hawaii in 2019. Their commitment to the success of small businesses is inextricably linked to their deep commitment to improved wellness outcomes and life expectancy. And they believe that creating sustainable small business systems is very tightly linked to the health and well-being of every one of their members. Our mission is inclusive economic prosperity, but beyond that, it's closing the wealth gap, it's reducing and ending concentrated poverty. That's our vision. That's what we get up every day to achieve. And that's why Kaiser Permanente has been our partner. They do really interesting and imaginative things. For example, I just want to mention their recent investment in building generational wealth, where they recently funded a project converting Courier Corporation of Hawaii into an employee ownership entity. And that's important because it maintains ownership, it maintains job, it maintains continuity, and it creates generational wealth. So as Anna Marie said, and I'll reiterate this, I want to remind everybody of the importance of nominators, partners, advisors, coaches, mentors, and small businesses in making this Iccc program once again a success in 2022. I want to give special acknowledgement to our friend Dave Tomilowicz. Dave, you helped make this possible. This would not have happened without your leadership. Dave, of course, is KP's Senior Director of Marketing and Community Health. Since taking over the programmatic work that we do together and recognizing the unique challenges that Hawaii-based businesses face due to their location and geography, David asked if we would create an additional educational seminar as a taste of what Iccc participants access, convening multi-sector experts to speak about competitive advantages of island economies and how businesses can better position themselves for success. And in a few minutes, when I finish with my remarks, you're going to hear Stephen Bond-Smith kick off with some research and some work that he has done uniquely, both in Australia and now in Hawaii, that bears directly on this kind of work. So David, thank you so much for your leadership and for what Kaiser has done. You've changed lives, and for that we say thank you. I also want to acknowledge our event partners. And you'll see on the next slide some logos of organizations, all of which you know well. And we're grateful to all of them because it takes a broad cross-section of small organizations, nonprofits, business support organizations, business organizations that work with startups, and every one of them has been an extraordinary partner over these last few years. I want to mention briefly ICIC's focus on research to strengthen local economies, because we are a unique blend of thought leadership and practice leadership. Our roots are in research. We believe in data-driven programs, including research that address the greatest challenges to growth and long-term sustainability: the lack of a network, the lack of access to capital, the lack of coaches, the lack of mentors. And when David prompted this event, we couldn't agree more about the importance of exploring diversification of the Hawaii economy to lift up small businesses, especially during the pandemic. I want to call your attention to a recession recovery tracker that we've done now for many quarters. We just published one middle of this month. We're going to drop it in the chat, and we're going to make sure you get a link to it, because it explores what happened to small businesses in the 100 largest metros in the United States, including in Honolulu and surrounding areas, to jobs, to employment, and to small businesses. And what this shows is that while employment is coming back, businesses continue to be challenged to stay open. And that's something we need to address. Giving small businesses the tools to pivot, to develop new strategies, to emerge stronger from the pandemic, which has hit the Hawaiian Islands harder than any other part of this country. That's what this recession retractor will show. I will give you one interesting statistic. Businesses that employ 100 or more people nationwide are back to 99% of pre-pandemic employment. Businesses that employ 1 to 4 people, which is a vast number of businesses, particularly in Hawaii, are only at 73% of pre-pandemic employment. We've got a long way to go in terms of helping those businesses stable, which is why we've come together today. And it's going to take conversations like this one to convene business owners, researchers, policymakers, to bring forth imaginative, collaborative, transformative, and realistic solutions to emerge from the pandemic stronger than ever. I got a group of people to thank. I'm going to do it very quickly. Thanks to Stephen Bond-Smith, who's going to present shortly on growth by specialized diversification. To our dear friend, Senator Glenn Wakai, who you all know is chair of the Senate's Committee on Energy, Economic Development, and Tourism. He is a warrior for small businesses, a warrior. He was there at the beginning at the Y back in 2019, and he's never stopped working on behalf of small businesses and partnering with us. I want to thank the folks from DBE-DT. You all know what that means, what that acronym means. Lyle, thank you so much. Lyle Fujikawa, long-term Iccc partner who helped with the planning of this event. And Mark, thank you for being with us today and being a presenter and a panelist. And to Wayne Layugan, I hope I'm doing it right, Wayne. I've done it wrong a couple of times in the past. Thank you all for being with us today. DBEDT has been a phenomenal partner. And I would never leave out MEDB, the Maui Economic Development Board. They nominated so many businesses. When we went virtual, actually, it was a boon to this program because we had so many businesses that would never have traveled from Maui, but came in virtually and participated the last 3 years. And Leslie, we know you, as president and CEO of the organization, will continue to be a strong advocate. To Shan Wirt, adjunct instructor, Small Business Entrepreneurship Clinic at the University of Hawaii at the Richardson School of Law, thank you for serving as a moderator today. To Mana Up, to our dear friends, Brittany Hyde is with us today. Brittany's been here, and Mana Up, she mentioned to me earlier that half of their portfolio companies have been involved with ICCC at one time or another since 2019, which is a great statistic. And finally, to our ICCC alum, Bella Hughes, co-founder of Shaka Tea. Bella was involved in 2021 at the Kinder, Gentler Shark Tank pitch competition that we do at our annual conference, which is coming up once again in early December. She wasn't just a presenter, she was the audience choice winner. And we have 13 other alumni registered today to be part of this conversation. So there you have it, our sponsors, our dear friends, alumni, building a strong, vibrant, healthy community for economic revitalization for these wonderful islands that I visited now, I think 11 times with Barbara and our family. So with that, before I turn it back to Anna Marie to move the program along, I'm going to introduce Stephen Bond-Smith, Dr. Stephen Bond-Smith. Stephen Bond-Smith, as you all know, is assistant professor at UHERO at the University of Hawaii. His main research focus is the implications of distance and scale for productivity and growth in small and isolated economies, such as Hawaii's. He's got vast experience as co-editor of the journal Spatial Economic Analysis, and prior to joining UHERO, was a senior research fellow in economics at Curtin University in Western Australia. He's done a great deal of work providing economic advice and counsel in Australia and New Zealand. I can't think of a better person to kick this off with his presentation, Growth by Specialized Diversification. Stephen Bond-Smith, take it away.
And great, thanks, Steve. I'm looking forward to looking at that recession tracker as well. That looks really interesting. I will just share my slides. So, my research is focused very much on innovation and growth in these small and isolated economies. I was inspired by another small and isolated economy, also in the Pacific, Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I'm from. And I've since been working on this topic in Western Australia, also an isolated economy, isolated by a desert rather than an ocean. But there are very similar characteristics between all of these economies. And I've been able to start applying the framework that I used in those places for thinking about innovation and diversification for the economy of Hawaii. So all of these economies are really concentrated in particular industries. There's a natural tendency towards specialization that has both benefits and costs. So Hawaii's concentration in the visitor industry, I think, is a long-term economic development problem that existed before the pandemic, but the pandemic really highlighted the issue. And diversification is now a priority, I think, for recovery and the long-term development of the economy of Hawaii. But before I discuss diversification, I think it's really important to understand the problem. Why is Hawaii's economy so concentrated? And there are three factors that are left out of economic models that I think explain a lot about small and isolated economies. These are scale, distance, and economic integration. So it's really important to understand how these factors affect Hawaii's economy, because it defines the real problem, the purpose of diversifying, and the scope for what Hawaii can do about it. So firstly, scale. There are certain productivity benefits from scale. Many people are familiar with economies of scale, that for some industries, as a business gets larger, it becomes more productive. There are certain fixed costs to running a business. And for a very small business, they'll spend a lot of time just doing the accounts, let alone trying to figure out how to make that business run better. But there are also productivity benefits from the external scale of the economy. External scales are things outside of a business, like the size of a market, having lots of choices of suppliers, having access to a large labor market. There are many external scales that offer productivity benefits. Economists use increasing returns to scale to help explain why economic activity clusters together in large cities. 83% of the US population lives in cities, and most of those who live in rural areas are still within a commutable distance of a large city. But the external scale for businesses in Hawaii will always be rather small because Hawaii is so small. So scale for businesses is difficult in Hawaii. So secondly, distance. Now we all know Hawaii is very isolated, but distance also affects that external scale of the economy. These external scales are mostly more difficult in Hawaii because of its distance from the rest of the world. And Honolulu is the most isolated city in the world with a population of over 100,000 people. Coming from Perth, where people also claim it's the most isolated city in the world by using 1 million people as that threshold, I'm pretty familiar with what this does to an economy. External scale is really difficult in small and isolated places because there are place-specific costs to expand to further places. Small businesses in Hawaii who expand beyond the state have to do so when their business is still rather small, at a much earlier stage in their development than a business in, say, California or in any other mainland state. And similarly, it may be easier for a business in a small mainland state to simply expand across the border than it is for a small business in Hawaii to expand across an ocean. So external scale is also difficult for industries in Hawaii because of this isolation. And thirdly is economic integration. So when small scale economies can trade something that they're really good at producing, then locals will tend to switch away from working in the expensive, less production activities to the productive one, because they can trade for those less productive activities. So in small scale open economies, there's a tendency towards more extreme specialization. This specialization gives that small open economy the scale that it needs to be competitive. Hawaii doesn't have to do everything for itself. It can specialize in what it is good at, and it can do that at significant scale. And it can get even better at that industry by expanding the scale of that industry. And Hawaii has massive scale in the visitor industry. And that scale provides productivity benefits for businesses in the visitor industry. And Hawaii uses those productivity benefits to trade for the things that it isn't good at, with places that do those things better. So specialization is a response to Hawaii's small scale and its isolation that takes advantage of an opportunity to trade with a really large economy in the United States and with a globalized world. It's really important to keep in mind that this specialization makes Hawaii better off by generating scale to overcome its own small scale and its own isolation. And the visitor industry is that specialty because of the rich endowment of Hawaii's climate, its culture, beaches, scenery, and so on. So since specialization has its benefits, efforts to limit expansion of that specialization will not generate a diversified economy, but will limit productivity in Hawaii's key industry and hurt the economy of Hawaii. But specialization also has its risks. Hawaii's economy is often rocked by external economic shocks. It's not just the pandemic. Visitor spending is punctured by severe and sharp shocks with the Asian financial crisis, 9/11, the global financial crisis and Great Recession, and most recently by the pandemic. Specialization in the visitor industry also isn't just a short-term risk. Hawaii's growth is largely reflected that of the USA, such that as the economy grew, more people wanted to travel. But spending per visitor has declined for the last 30 years. This chart shows per visitor per day spending in Hawaii, and the bars show the annual changes. With few productivity improvements in tourism, or at least the value of productivity improvements is accruing to consumers, it means the value per tourist per day has declined for decades. By specializing in tourism, with no suitable alternatives to generate growth, Hawaii's productivity growth has been lackluster for decades. As a result, Hawaii's growth has failed to keep up with the rest of the USA since the Asian financial crisis. Growth had already stalled in 2019 before the pandemic. Real GDP peaked back in 2005 at almost $67,000 in 2021 dollars, and it didn't reach this level again until 2019 before falling prior to the pandemic. So it's clearly important for Hawaii to find other activities in order to sustain growth of its economy beyond the visitor industry. But efforts to artificially limit the visitor industry are likely to exacerbate this diminishing growth rate and cause Hawaii to fall behind the rest of the United States. Based on these trends, there's a grave risk that Hawaii becomes one of the left behind places, or the so-called places that don't matter. So diversification is promoted to offer opportunities for productivity growth and to reduce risk. Now, any good financial advisor promotes the benefits of a diversified portfolio. A portfolio with investments in a range of stocks, bonds, different industries, and other asset classes whose returns are uncorrelated or negatively correlated can offer higher returns while mitigating risk. If we look at how states performed during the pandemic, states that were less specialized had lower unemployment. If Hawaii had been more diversified like these other states, the state's economy might not have been hurt so badly by COVID or any other future shock that comes along. Unemployment was even higher in Maui or Kauai, as their economies are even more concentrated on tourism. And I've seen very similar patterns in Australian states that gross state product is much more volatile in states that are less diversified. The World Bank also looked at diversification in small countries. The chart on the left shows that for small countries, those with more diversified economies experienced higher growth. And the chart on the right looks at volatility, showing that those countries with more diversified economies have lower volatility. So diversification supports growth and diversification reduces risk. This chart compares industry concentration and patents per 1,000 scientists and engineers for all 50 states plus Puerto Rico. And there's a clear correlation showing that more diversified places tend to be more innovative. And it is this innovation that supports higher productivity growth in those more diversified places. Overall, the research shows that regions will tend to be specialized in order to have productivity benefits from scale, but diversification supports innovation and growth and reduces risk. By understanding Hawaii's industry structure in this context of scale and distance and economic integration, diversification policy requires striking the right balance between specialization to achieve productivity benefits from scale and diversification to offer longer-term opportunities for growth and reduce volatility or risk. Hawaii needs alternative sources of growth so that the limits on tourism are generated by better opportunities elsewhere rather than artificial constraints. Keeping this in mind as the goal of diversification, let's look at how. Now, since specialization is the tendency in these small and isolated and integrated places, pushing back against specialization in order to diversify is really difficult. An investor diversifies across multiple investment types and industries to reduce risk and increase returns relative to risk. But as many of you will know, diversification is not quite so easy for a business as it is for an investor. It's really difficult for a business to manage disparate products from different industries. And there are similar characteristics for a state or regional economy. This is because there's lots of connections between different parts of a corporation, often described as synergies. And there are lots of connections between different parts of a state economy that all depend on each other. Different industries need different capabilities, different supports, different institutions, different skills, and a small state or a small business will be poorer if it tries to do everything. Unlike diversifying a portfolio, there are certain benefits from doing particular activities together, firstly within a business, or what economists call economies of scope, but also doing particular economic activities together within a place. So an optimal diversification strategy is limited to the range and scope of related activities within a place that share productivity benefits with one another. So this suggests looking for new industries that are related to existing industries in Hawaii that make use of many of the same skills, infrastructure, and capabilities used in the visitor industry, or that make use of particular expertise and characteristics that are very unique to Hawaii. These new industries might be subject to quite different demand fluctuations and characteristics than tourism, giving some of the benefits of diversification, while building off the benefits of scale for productivity. And this is what I wrote about in my new hero brief, Location, 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 shown on diversifying the economy, shown here on our website. Now, it seems these ideas are not really new at all. The very first chapter of this book, The Price of Paradise, which many of you will be familiar with, describes exactly the strategy that I recommend to target related industries that make use of the things Hawaii is already good at. And this book was written 30 years ago. So targeting related industries makes sense and has already for a long time. But how do we know what the related opportunities are? We can have a few pretty good guesses, which is the approach taken in the book. And Hawaii's done some of the things that the chapter recommends. They built a convention center and expanded business and conference travel, diversifying the visitor base in Hawaii. And business visitors might have slightly different demand characteristics than tourists, especially to add demand outside of the peak summer period, but make use of similar capabilities such as hotels and amenities that are used by tourists. And while some initiatives might not be as successful as initially hoped, over many such initiatives, there will be some that are enormously beneficial. But once these more obvious ideas are done, like the ones discussed back in 1992, what else can Hawaii do? What types of activities should Hawaii's government invest in to encourage diversification? And what new industries can businesses such as yours create that will generate new jobs in new industries? It's really important to use deep local knowledge to identify these opportunities. And it's not for an outsider like me to say, Hawaii should do something. Locals don't want a foreigner or someone from Washington coming in and telling them what they should be doing. The problem is that when you ask people, their own ideas are full of their own personal biases. People seek out support for their existing businesses, not support for new fields where there could be more competition. These can be pet projects or something where they have a financial interest, a professional connection, or any other internal bias. Around the world, industry policy has often failed in the past because it favored a politician's special interest or tried to save a dying industry for too long. So we need to use more objective ways to identify opportunities for diversification and implement effective governance structures that incentivize a market-based entrepreneurial discovery process. Now, there's been decades of research since this book, looking at how economies grow and diversify. And it's also tended very much towards the concept of related industries. This research treats industries or products as a complex system of shared activities. Think of a single product in your business and all of the different capabilities that go into producing that product. Similarly, think of another product in your business and the capabilities required to produce that one. Typically, two products are paired within the same business because they use many of the same capabilities. Many of these capabilities are also external to the business. And so two businesses that use a shared local capability are more likely to locate alongside one another. For example, a restaurant in Waikiki makes use of the same airplanes as the hotels that bring their customers to Honolulu for a vacation. They both utilize the same laundry and cleaning services, and they both make use of a pool of talented employees trained and experienced in hospitality. So it's natural that these two products might appear within the same business, or that these two businesses will appear in the same places. An accounting firm or an insurance broker has very little use for the tourists that eat at fine restaurants and stay at hotels in Waikiki. And so these professional services businesses locate downtown, where they have the best access to other professional services that they use and share in a skilled pool of accountants, lawyers, and MBAs. Similarly, various types of IT businesses cluster together in Silicon Valley, biotech clusters in Boston, finance clusters in New York City. Cities tend to specialize in particular clusters of related industries because they all share similar inputs or capabilities that make up all of the necessary components required to produce and supply their products. On this basis, each dot in this image represents an industry, and industries are clustered together by the relationships between these industries. There are low aggregation and high aggregation clusters, with the high aggregation clusters labeled. The colored dots record those industries with a significant presence in Honolulu. And it shows three main clusters around hospitality for tourists, food for tourists, and logistics to get tourists in and out of Hawaii, as well as a significant finance and insurance cluster, a significant government cluster, and professional services clusters. These are the key industries in Hawaii, and they're clustered together because these businesses within those clusters use similar capabilities to supply their customers. For a business considering all of the capabilities that form the ingredients used in their products, and considering all of the ways that these capabilities are used in different combinations, and how these capabilities are shared with other businesses in their location, and considering what additional capabilities would be needed for a new product, we can think about alternative products and industries that would make productive use of all of the existing capabilities that Hawaii is already very good at. We saw this type of activity during the pandemic. For example, many businesses pivoted to selling their products online. They added an online sales capability in order to produce a new product. Distilleries expanded to temporarily produce hand sanitizer. And in the same way that these new products made use of their existing capabilities by adding a few new capabilities to generate new products, a successful diversification strategy branches out from that existing set of specialized capabilities that are in your business, shared with your competitors, your suppliers, and your customers, and are already here in Hawaii. Hawaii will not become a new Silicon Island. It doesn't have the capabilities for that, but it has a special set of other capabilities that allow Hawaii to diversify by combining its specialized set of capabilities in new ways and adding the most useful capabilities that generate new products using those existing capabilities. It won't be as diversified as other places. It's too small for that, but there are also productivity benefits from still doing what we are good at. Now, since businesses and industries using shared capabilities are typically located together, by analyzing which products are frequently done together across the country within the same firms or in the same places, it implies connections between those products. This generates a network of connections between products. This particular network describes all of the products exported around the world. The research on exports finds that if pairs of industries are frequently exported together, it makes them a lot more likely to emerge in places that currently only do one industry or the other. This means that economies tend to diversify and grow by moving along the branches of this network. Similarly, these networks describe industry employment co-location by US metro areas with similar patterns of diversification along the branches of the networks. So we need to look at what products and industries Hawaii is really good at and see what opportunities branch out from those. It's also best to move towards products that are in the cores of these networks because these tend to provide for many more opportunities to support long-run growth. The techniques applied here to jobs and exports can also be applied to firms or to patents and innovation or to any other disaggregated component of the economy to see what diversification opportunities there are at a firm level, what opportunities there are for R&D, or what opportunities there are for any other dimension. And this sort of analysis provides a pretty strong indication of diversification possibilities. My program of research is investigating these objective indicators. It will generate a list of products or industries that are strengths and opportunities. The opportunities are not yet in Hawaii or are currently very weak, but are industries that you would expect to exist because of Hawaii's other strengths. I'll group these industries together into domains using cluster analysis that combines industries so that they're more related to industries within the group than outside the group. And I'll identify the most promising domains where there are significant opportunities, where those industries offer higher productivity and are likely to be more feasible because they're related to the existing activities in Hawaii. But even once I have these indicators, it's not for me to specify what Hawaii businesses and locals should do next. It's for locals to decide on what a diversified future should look like. By taking this framework and the many sources of information and analysis, locals can determine a vision for the future and the types of initiatives and industries that are suitable in Hawaii. For this process, I recommend borrowing some ideas from the European Union's smart specialization policy. In many ways, this is similar to the comprehensive economic development strategies framework, but smart specialization has a narrower scope focused on feasible opportunities and a more strategic investment in the critical factors to enable those opportunities. Without a stronger process to define a vision, scope, and strategic investment, the comprehensive economic development strategies have tended to be too broad. The next step is finding out why these opportunities don't exist yet, or why they're currently weak. And this involves a deep dive into each of these industries in consultation with communities and stakeholders to find out what's going on and what it is about Hawaii that's prevented this industry from emerging on its own. It's not picking winners, winning firms or ideas, but reflecting on a regional economy, both quantitatively with the types of methods that I've proposed and qualitatively by businesses and stakeholders to consider their capabilities and new opportunities. This process highlights strength and opportunity. Smart specialization is about not spreading resources too thinly or investing areas that are unlikely to be sustained in Hawaii, because a region cannot do everything, so should promote activities around its unique strengths. By providing the missing ingredients to a domain or an industry, entrepreneurs and businesses can then make new combinations of capabilities and generate new products with all of the benefits of market forces governing their competitiveness and productivity. But a really important element of this approach is that it gets community support by being a bottom-up, community-led process. Locals determine the vision for the future, what they want diversification to look like. Locals are asked to look outside their own businesses and current financial interests to consider how their capabilities could be useful for a new product or industry. By analyzing the strengths and opportunities in Hawaii in relation to existing capabilities, the network of industries provides an input to communities as a guide for creating this local vision, and then digs into the deep local knowledge of Kama'aina, of local businesses, the universities, and the communities to find out what opportunities haven't yet grown in Hawaii and what the barriers are. So my program of work, both analyzing economic opportunities in Hawaii and advising stakeholders on policy and strategy, will generate a lot of really useful information that will help policymakers and businesses find an effective diversification strategy for Hawaii. But the most crucial element of diversification is still the community itself. So thank you for joining me today. I hope this discussion provides some inspiration to think about how to diversify your businesses and the economy of Hawaii. Thank you.
Stephen, thanks so very much. Extraordinary foundational research that is going to play an important role in all of the work that the local partners are going to be doing together to identify strong, vibrant clusters and to take this approach to the next level. So we're very grateful for your work and for your partnership. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to my colleague, Anna Marie Cruz, who'll continue. We're mostly on target here schedule-wise. Anna Marie's going to keep us there. Anna Marie, back to you.
Thank you so much, Steve and Dr. Bond-Smith. Wonderful foundation for this next segment, which is additional presentations now from our policymakers, from state agencies, as well as the SEDS that Dr. Bond-Smith referenced. These folks need no introduction, and because of time, I will just let you know that they're going to present in this order. And we have Senator Glenn Wakai, Mark Ritchie from DBED, Wayne Layugan from DBED, as well as Leslie Wilkins of the MEDB. So we will just move on and keep things flowing. Senator Wakai, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna Marie and Steve, for your commitment to Hawaii. And I'm super thrilled about Kaiser Permanente's involvement in this program. I mean, you think of them as a healthcare entity that takes care of our bodies, but look at them. They're taking care of the health of our economy. So kudos to Kaiser Permanente's commitment. And good news, the economy is thriving. Tourism has roared back. In the first 4 months of this year, visitors spent $5.8 billion, with a B, $billion in Hawaii. That is more than the first 4 months of 2019, which was, as many of us recall, a record year for the state. And the best part is that we brought in more money so far this year with 16% fewer visitors than in 2019. Remember back then, we were talking about over-tourism. We came up with the DMAPs, the Destination Management Action Plans. So things have actually evolved very nicely in the development of the tourism sector. But as things return to better than normal, there's less pressure for us to diversify our economy. And I agree with everything that was just mentioned about the necessity for us to diversify, because COVID was really the opportune time for Hawaii to create a more resilient economy, but we really didn't. Remember talk of a state navigator? It was supposed to be led by prolific business people who are going to chart a new course for Hawaii's economy. Well, that proposal never got out of the gate in 2020. Then there was promises of a Hawaii 2.0 economic plan in 2021. Chee-hoo! Well, that never materialized either. So we are back here where we began, relying purely on tourism to provide for our needs. And in Hawaii, we bemoan our isolation and resign ourselves to the price of paradise. And I'm going to try to share my screen now. And there we go. Okay. The book that was referred to by Mr. Roth 30 years ago, and we really haven't kind of changed things much since that book was published. And I really want to see how we as a community can just rethink the price of paradise and look at the opportunities for profitability in paradise. And we should do so by embracing innovation. And I offer you this. I call it the AAA Economic Plan for Innovation. So it builds off of what was just mentioned as to what are Hawaii's strengths. And really, we need to focus on Hawaii as being a global leader in certain areas. And I offer to you, these 3 areas are untapped opportunities for us as a state. So I'm going to quickly go through each of these A's. And first is aerospace. In addition to us having the best set of telescopes on the planet, Hawaii is the closest state in America to the equator. It's the best spot for launching of satellites into orbit. There are 20,000 satellites that need to be sent up to provide for all of our mobility requirements of today. And that middle picture you see, or that picture that you see of the launch pad, that is in New Zealand. It's Rocket Lab's launch facility. And launch facilities also attract assembly plants, research facilities. So it's not just purely the transportation part of sending a satellite into orbit. It's all of the support that comes around it. But I know in Hawaii, we kind of skittish about vertical launches, but the satellites of the future, or the satellites of today actually, are either size of a microwave, as small as a Rubik's cube, and it can be launched by that picture on the right, which is a drone. Hawaii is one of only 6 states in America with an FAA drone license. And what are we doing with it? Nothing. We should be really harnessing that particular opportunity to send drones and grow a drone industry here, to send not just satellites into space. And one day our Amazon orders are going to come via drone. Maybe some of us will travel like the Jetsons via some type of drone. Hawaii really could and should be at the front edge of drone research for America. And that picture you have there, I have here in the bottom, is Haleakala, and that's a laser communication facility. Laser communication, much better than satellite communication, cellular communication, faster, more secure. There's talk of building a similar one on Mauna Loa on the Big Island. And Hawaii really could be the laser communications capital of the planet. And as we have all these communication devices, they consume a lot of energy and a lot of data. And wouldn't it be cool if we kind of synergize NELHA, that the Ocean facility we have in Kona and use some of the cool water there to help cool down all the data that's going to be needed in a data center. So maybe we could put those pieces together as well. And then that bottom picture on the right, this is my crazy idea that, you know, our elementary school students of today, one of them is going to colonize the moon. And when we as humanity try to figure out how we're going to do that, I mean, look at the lunar terrain on the Big Island, and that is the best place for humanity to practice for the opportunity of one day landing up and living on another planet. And so Hawaii has so many assets that we should be leveraging and growing a true aerospace industry. Next, I want to talk about aquaculture. I find it astonishing that we import 65% of the fish we eat in the state of Hawaii. I doubt that they're importing too many cows into Nebraska, but lo and behold, we're importing fish for us to consume. We should really be a net exporter of fish. We talk about agriculture, and agriculture is kind of nostalgic for us, right? Many of our grandparents came to Hawaii because of agriculture, sugarcane, pineapple. So we're kind of stuck and fixated on somehow value add and processing of agriculture and pay almost no attention to the volume of opportunities in the ocean. So the Department of Agriculture has 315 employees. Three of them are devoted to aquaculture. Less than 1% of our entire approach to food sustainability is focused on the ocean. We should really recalibrate that. And not just this deep sea pen that you see here. We have Hawaiians, we're prolific at fish ponds and raising food in fish ponds. Why not put a spin on that with technology, helping circulation of water, whatever is necessary for them to grow aquaculture here in Hawaii. And we know that it's not just protein, we can grow vegetables, ogo, seaweed, all kinds of other assortment of things in the ocean, but we really should be paying attention to the ocean as our bread basket and not only be fixated on terrestrial agriculture. And the last thing I wanted to just touch on is alternative energy. We look at this array of opportunities. We got a volcano, we got hydro, we have biomass, we have wind, we have ocean waves, we have ocean thermodynamics. Hawaii really is the leader in America and the world in coming up with renewable energy opportunities. But the one thing that I don't think we're paying attention to is all the intellectual property that's going to come in bringing all of these pieces together, such as how does seawater affect the degradation of a turbine? How do we manage the grid with all of these various inputs? No one in Hawaii that I know of is really capturing that intellectual property. And if Hawaii is going to be leading the planet on getting to 100% renewable, there's an opportunity to monetize all the data that is being collected. We really should be looking at that because when you look at all of these opportunities for renewable energies, they in and of itself, renewable energy doesn't create jobs. That PV farm, that wind farm that lasts for 20 years might have 8 employees. So renewable energy in and of itself doesn't provide really good long-term volume of jobs. But the intellectual property, to me, that's the gold mine for our efforts to move our energy efforts forward. And I just want to leave you with this. Remember this is from 10 years ago. We had talked about an inter-island cable to provide for all of our energy needs on Oahu. What we were doing with this idea was to suck all the energy opportunities from Kauai, Maui, Big Island, Lanai, and feed Oahu. Maybe we should think about, as we talk about economic diversity in Hawaii, looking at the neighbor islands instead of bringing energy to Oahu. If the neighbor islands have more energy and fewer lower cost energy and more land and more water, we should really be thinking about diversification of our economy through the neighbor islands. So I leave all of you with that, and I will stop here and let smarter people than me tell you how they see our efforts to diversify our economy. Thank you, Anna Marie.
Thank you so much, Senator. And we'll move on to our next presentation with Mark and Wayne at Deep End.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna Marie. And thank you very much, Senator Okai, and also Stephen Bond Smith. Those are very good comments and very good sort of economic analysis. So what we wanted to do here is just let you know what tool set we actually have and currently in Hawaii. Some of it is statutory. Hawaii as a state, compared to a lot of other states, does not have a very large tool set, but I'd like to just tell you a little bit about what we do have and sort of how these programs work. So I work in DBED and I work in the Business Development and Support Division, and my colleague Wayne Layugan works for the Hawaii Technology Development Corporation. And we are pretty much the two groups are the most business-facing groups in DBED. In other words, our real mission is to work with companies and help them grow and be successful. So how do we do that? And what kind of programs do we have? Our programs are designed to try to support existing and emerging industries, bring new investment and businesses to the state, increase exports of Hawaii products and services, and expand Hawaii companies' participation in global trade and commerce, assisting growing community-based businesses and organizations, and then try to build resiliency to fluctuation in defense industry spending. Because one thing that wasn't covered here is really our second largest cluster is built around our defense economy, since we have such a large military presence, particularly here on Oahu. And our division, we are looking at not just trying to grab more opportunities with defense industry, but try to help our companies be resilient to fluctuations in defense spending, because we know there's always been ups and downs on that. Next slide, Wayne. So one of our programs is our community-based economic development program. This is in statute. We basically do small business loans, we offer grants, and then also we offer technical assistance. Our loan program is actually going very strongly right now. We are lender of last resort. This is for companies that cannot get an SBA guaranteed loan or a commercial bank loan. And the lens that we're looking at these borrowers from is, are they helping creating jobs where jobs are needed, and are they giving back to a community and providing new services and things like that. So that's the lens we're looking at for our CBED our community-based economic development program, or CBED. We do tend to focus our loans on trying to support manufacturing, and a lot of that is sort of value-added ag manufacturing, and then wholesaling, and then agriculture production. Next slide, Wayne. Another program we have is the Enterprise Zone program. Again, this is in statute. A lot of states have Enterprise Zone programs, and basically this is designed for job creation in economically challenged areas of the state. And businesses have to meet eligibility requirements, but this is really about companies getting tax benefits in exchange for job creation. And this is really not designed to support emerging industries, because the tax breaks are all related to how much you already owe the state. So if you are still in the red, or still doing a burn rate, this program isn't really going to help you. So it's really designed for more successful companies that already are owing the state a lot of taxes. And it's also only for the biggest sectors in this are manufacturers, wholesalers, and ag companies. Although I think, as Senator Wakai mentioned, and I completely agree with you, one renewable energy sector that's eligible is wind energy. And unfortunately, that doesn't really create a whole lot of jobs, but it does try to support the growth of that industry in Hawaii. Next slide. And lastly, this is not statutory. We're working off an SBA grant, but we have an export development program designed to help companies reach beyond Hawaii, help our companies grow. Hawaii is a small place, and it's great to sort of grow in Hawaii, but at some point you want to get beyond the state and actually bring in a lot of revenue from selling your products and services in other places, such as Japan, the US mainland, etc. So we have really three components to this. One is a lot of education, one-on-one mentoring, technical assistance. We also do Hawaii pavilions overseas, such as, the Tokyo International Gift Show. We were just at a life science conference with the Hawaii Pavilion in San Diego. And then the third component is actually, it's competitive, but companies can get awards of up to $15,000 to help them with their export development program and to take their products and services overseas. And then I'm going to turn it over to Wayne, who's going to talk about some of the HTDC or Innovate Hawaii programs.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so as Mark mentioned, HCDC is a state agency attached to DBED. I like to think our mission at HCDC is to inspire Hawaii to accelerate business growth with local innovation. Some of the ways we do this are by providing capital, building infrastructure, and developing talent to foster innovation. So this is just in, on May 19th, 2022, the state of Hawaii's application was approved by the U.S. Treasury for the State Small Business Credit Initiative, SSBCI, which is a program that was part of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So SSBCI brings Hawaii up to $62 million in federal funding to expand access to capital for small businesses, startups, and entrepreneurs. So HCDC is the lead for the HICAP program. This is what we're calling our SSBCI program, and has partnered with the Hawaii Green Infrastructure Authority, which is a division within DBED, to jointly administer the program. I apologize in advance. I'm not the right person that has all the info and details for this, but I encourage you, if you'd like to learn more about the 4 types of offerings within HICAP that will be available to Hawaii small businesses, please go to htdc.org, or you can scan that QR code in the top corner. The following 2 slides, I'm going to talk about some of our state grant programs that are administered by Innovate Hawaii that offer direct matching and grant assistance to companies who are developing intellectual property or products, or are expanding their manufacturing capacity. So the first one is the Hawaii SBIR program. This program provides matching grants to federal SBIR, STTR awardees to advance their phase 1 research, and then enhance their competitiveness in phase 2 development, and further commercialize their product or technology. The biggest takeaway, I guess, from this program is that, to be eligible for the Hawaii SBIR matching grant, one of the key requirements is that your company is awarded a SBIR, STTR from one of the federal agencies. So again, matching grant program provided by the state. So with that said, again, for details about the Hawaii SBIR program and to learn more about our upcoming Pacific Technology Conference in October, please go to hcdc.org or scan the QR code. For those of you who are not familiar, if you'd like to learn more about America's Seed Fund, or would like to meet with government customers, potential investors, prime contractors, federal SBIR, STTR program representatives, and other supporting agencies, then I encourage you to join us at the Pacific Tech Conference in October. Innovate Hawaii's manufacturing assistance program provides up to 20% reimbursement for local manufacturers to expand capacity through the purchase of manufacturing equipment, training on manufacturing equipment, and or studying or planning of a new facility. Again, we're short on time, so for more details on the manufacturing assistance program, please go to hcdc.org or scan this QR code, which will bring you directly to more information about the manufacturing assistance program. I think lastly, I just wanted to mention that Innovate Hawaii is also a federally funded program that is the official representative of the MEP National Network in Hawaii. There are 51 centers located in every state in Puerto Rico, and roughly 1,300 advisors who are passionate about advancing manufacturing. And that's what we do in Hawaii. This means that our national network has a local on-the-ground presence everywhere in the country, which allows us to bring in expertise and national resources to manufacturers in Hawaii.
I think I was going to jump in, and the last point we want to make is maybe we don't see it at sort of the top levels in the state, but at the working level, we are all about leveraging our relationships and partnerships and not trying to duplicate things and sort of make it, 1 + 1 = 3 or 4. So we just put a lot of logos up here of the different organizations that are co-lending partners, or we have different relationships on these various programs. I also should have put the counties up here because they're part of the Enterprise Zone program. That's a state-county partnership. And I think this is real key because Hawaii is a small state. We're all kind of underfunded, small groups. So trying to work together to leverage our expertise is really crucial in this state. It's very important. And I think all the people in these organizations really try, and on weekly sort of calls with different organizations on different projects. And that's it for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'd now like to invite Leslie Wilkins of MEDB to present.
Well, aloha and good morning. Go back to the beginning. Your wrong slides up. Your wrong slides up. Good morning, everyone, and aloha. Thank you for including me. First of all, I want to say thank you to David Chmielewicz for, as was said earlier by Gwen Wakai, we depend on you to keep us healthy. We depend on you to get the vaccinations widely deployed across our state. But we also thank you for investing in the health and resiliency of our economy. You know, David and I sit on a consortium organization of all my sister economic development boards. We're on the board together. And at every meeting, we are driven by the late Pono Shim, who we just lost, who was my counterpart at Oahu Economic Development Board. And he always reminded us it's economic development for whom, right? For our residents. We know that we are in strong recovery in the visitor industry, but we have not had shared recovery throughout. There's a lot of disparity, and in our state, as the wealth disparity continues to grow with a wider graph, I think that's what drives us to continue economic development for all. So do you have the slides? All right, so we have a slide deck here. I would like to thank Gail Tolentino for driving the slides and creating the slides. I'm coming to you from South Maui, the Maui Research and Technology Park. Behind you is our building in the tech park. It's home to MEDB. It's our headquarters, although our programs stretch throughout the state. And I'm honored to work alongside 22 colleagues, staff members, with we're spread on 3 different islands in our fair state. We also share this with Pacific Disaster Center, tracking natural disaster mitigation, as well as COVID outbreak, and the newest startup, Senator Wakai, in the aerospace industry, which we totally agree with you that that's a cluster to develop, Privateer Space, which is doing space tracking and debris mitigation with how congested space is. So next slide. So MEDB is a private nonprofit. We're almost 40 years old. We're industry led by a very impressive board of directors who we rely on their guidance. What I was asked to talk about is the intersectionality. Our mission is inspiring innovation in business, education, and community. So we totally believe that growing innovation in our businesses, looking at homegrown entrepreneurship is the way to strengthen our economy. And to do that, we very, very much have to look at growing the homegrown workforce, a STEM talented workforce, workforce that has an entrepreneurial mindset, that is looking to the future, knowing that skill set development must continue to be future focused. So embedding that critical thinking and problem solving in our youth, in the educational pathways, we like to say from keiki all the way to careers, which means upskilling to some of our more mature workers. And then the engagement of our community. I think Dr. Bond-Smith, you said that very strongly at the beginning. If we're not asking our community members and engaging them as what we need for a stronger, more resilient economic future, that is just not filling our values. So next slide. So we are values-based economic development. I think I share this with the other EDBs, our other sister organizations. Again, it's shared prosperity. How do we become more resilient? As a neighbor islander, we felt the most pain. As Dr. Bond-Smith said, we are more heavily dependent on the visitor industry. So we had some of the greatest pain points. And we want to make sure that even though it came to the forefront and we had much political will, community will, and a commitment to diversifying our economy, we have to make sure that as we're seeing a robust recovery in the visitor industry, that we are not lulled into complacency. Are we willing to be disciplined and make the long-term investments that it will take to further strengthen and build further economic clusters to balance our economy? We also celebrate the diversity of our state. We know, as was just said by DBED, it's all about the collaboration. We're a small state. We all have to come to the table to leverage our resources, valuing our multicultural community, the indigenous knowledge of our host culture, et cetera, and also preparing all of us for the needed global relationships. Next slide. So I was asked to talk about the SEDS. The SEDS is ongoing right now. It's the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy that is required by the federal EDA, Economic Development Administration, under the U.S. Department of Commerce. There's a lot of federal agencies speak for you. So that is going on now. All of our sister EDBs have a contract through the federal government, to the Office of State Planning, to our sister organization, EDA, to all of the ground-based EDBs to conduct our community-based SEDS. That's all happening. We're also starting this week the statewide SEDS. So it is to help us create a roadmap. We know there have been literally hundreds of plans that have gone before this. There are other planning documents and facilitation and convening happening now. But again, when we make the investment as we present this to our policymakers, our lawmakers, our various industry groups and community groups, we all take ownership of this plan to try to advance some of the strategies that are coming up from a huge scale engagement of our community. It's really important. It's done about every 5 years. This will go through 2027. And if you're applying for federal EDA funding, and even other agencies are looking at this, it is critical that you see your proposal and project and you can align it and identify it back to the SEDS. We have already engaged about 250 folks in our Maui SEDS, and some new cluster development has come out. Thank you for defining clusters so beautifully, Dr. Smith. Next slide. So our strategy committee, and we have convened focus groups around all of these, obviously looking at how ag can be more business and technology driven as we look at diversified ag, since we have all lost large scale ag production. Housing came to the forefront. It used to be an underpinning enabling strategy. Housing is called out as critical. Creative industries. Again, this is new. How are we looking at an eco-economy and managing climate change adaptation and environmental restoration? Energy, which has been there, looking and calling out Hawaii knowledge, again, always used to be enabling strategy. It is called out to look to the indigenous knowledge of our host culture, healthcare and wellness. A space that MEDB works in quite a bit is science, tech, and innovation. Again, what are our specialties? As Dr. Bond Smith said, we have specialties in aerospace, we have a node in cybersecurity, and we are only based for clean manufacturing. And then of course, the visitor industry has been the dominant cluster. We also are looking at our small rural communities that are part of Maui County to make sure they have an individual voice. Strategies include equity of access and broadband expansion, education throughout the pipeline, as I mentioned, looking at our homegrown business incubation and acceleration, because we have seen the political will when lots of businesses have come to our shores to do wonderful things, but we've also seen their exodus when political will and funding goes elsewhere. And then our nonprofit sector is absolutely vital to securing the fabric of our society and making sure no one falls through the cracks, which is so culturally important for us. Next slide. So some of the programs that MEDB is looking to have that shared prosperity, we're very excited that we won a competitive grant from the SBA. It is the Community Navigator Pilot Program. Most all our programs are statewide, especially our STEM education. We're on every island across the state. This one is Maui Nui specific, but we hope the lessons and models we put in place for this can be replicated across the state. It is to look at our small businesses that were not able to take advantage of the SBA relief products that came out, whether it was PPP or EIDL loans. We know in analysis, it was really majority owned companies that already had financial infrastructure relationships with bankers, accountants that got in the portals in time to get the money. And our minority owned businesses, our small businesses in rural communities were not as successful. This is a pilot program by the SBA to try to build that financial capacity, that strength from within our rural communities and within our beautifully diverse minority communities, so that they have the business savvy to be able to be a part of the SBA ecosystem to get funding and support. These are some of our spokes. We are the hub. We're the ones that are trying to disseminate the resources, working with some important communities and reaching into Hana, Lanai, and Molokai to support that. So it is just launched. We're in the first year. It is over 2 years. It will end in November of 2023. So again, we welcome any recommendations from our underserved communities, how we can strengthen business coaching and build business coaches from within those communities. So they don't have to come to the SBA, SBDC, to DBED, to MEDB. They have coaching within community. Next slide. I included this just now because it's to the point of Dr. Bond-Smith. How do we look at an industry that we have concerns with, right? That there's possibly over tourism, it's extractionism, visitor doesn't necessarily always respect our cultural values. So this is using that very mature visitor infrastructure to bring the most globally sophisticated, mature people in the aerospace industry to our shores. The beautiful visitor industry on Maui and the hotels in Wailea have been now this will be our 23rd year in September of 2022 to bring Space Force here. Now our aerospace assets are commissioned under Space Force. And so we're bringing in the 4-star general who is in charge of Space Force, will be our keynote speaker. All of the contractors in aerospace, academics, we had over 200 research papers submitted. Those technical papers will be given in technical sessions. We have policy sessions, including the director of the space economy out of the US Department of Commerce, and the White House innovation will be here. And what this does, this brings the funders to our shores to see the science side of Paradise, the preeminent assets we have here, and help our small businesses who we're trying to grow so they can prime that $5 billion worth of contracts that come into our state for aerospace, that they have the fiscal capacity, they can team, they can prime some of those contracts because they're hiring locally. They're hiring our engineering graduates, they're hiring our computer science graduates, and they're a pathway home for many of our young people that we have seen increased out-migration during the pandemic. It's kind of frightening. And of course, it's not the 18 to, we are still recapturing retirees, 55, wealthy people, 55 and over. The out-migration is our creative class, if you will, and what Gladwell calls the 18 to 44-year-olds, which is very dangerous for our innovation and our economy. The next slide is, I just wanted to pay attention that everything has to be data-driven. We're very proud of this publication, and I think it can be replicated by our state and different communities. How do we look at the data for our values? How are we moving the dial for resident-driven economic health? Next slide. So we published a compendium that's over 3,200 data sets arranged under our values: people, place, and purpose. Does that not define Hawaii? And it's from a trend analysis from 05 sets all the way through 2020 census. So how are we moving the dial? Where can we make investments that better position us for a resilient economy that we all benefit from? And every day, I'm honored to work with my colleagues and all of our partners across the state. Many of them are here that believe that our goal is to make sure that every young person that grows up here has ability to stay or a pathway home for meaningful work, that they can support themselves and their family, and they have the resources to have stable housing and perpetuate our beautiful culture. So thank you very much. Thank you to ICIC. We look forward to our fourth cohort. We've had 43 businesses go through your successful program, everything from a third generation ice cream producing manufacturing company to a innovation company that has contracts with NASA to build payloads to go up on space flight to the International Space Station. So that shows the breadth and diversity that's our potential. Thank you so much for your time. I'm honored to be a part of this illustrious panel.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our presenters. And now as we transition to our next phase, which is, again, we encourage you to pop in those questions in the chat box. I'd like to introduce David Tomolowicz with Kaiser Permanente for some special remarks.
And thanks so much, Anna Marie. First of all, I want to express my appreciation, mahalo, to our presentees and our attendees today. Kaiser Permanente is privileged to support this webinar and the larger Iccc program here in Hawaii. And I just wanted to spend just half a second on saying why we support small business initiatives. We know that some 85% or more of health outcomes are determined by factors outside of the four walls of the healthcare system. And we talk about these as social determinants of health. Some of the most powerful social determinants are economic factors. So that's why we're privileged to support Iccc, along with our support for many other community organizations here in Hawaii, working together to build a stronger economy for Hawaii's diverse small businesses and our island families. So with that, I'm going to turn it over really quickly to Sean Wirt to run our Q&A. I just want to say, Sean is a tremendous resource. Her roots are in business and entrepreneurship advocacy. She is currently an independent legal and communications consultant, as well as an adjunct instructor for the Small Business Entrepreneurship Clinic at the University of Hawaii, Richardson School of Law. Many accomplishments. One I want to highlight. Sean helped to launch the Minority Business Development Agency's Enterprising Women of Color Business Center at the YWCA Oahu, which serves over 3,300 small businesses across the nation in its first year. The center is one of 5 across the nation established by the U.S. Department of Commerce. And at the center, Sean leveraged her legal and business experience to help minority and women-owned businesses grow through business analysis, market access, and access to capital. I could go on and on, Sean, but I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, David. Aloha, everyone. It's such an honor to be a part of today's event. I know we're a little bit short on time. I just wanted to, before we start the panel discussion, I wanted to share some thoughts. Being raised in Honolulu and a proud product of the UH system, having both having both obtained my Bachelor of Arts in Journalism, Public Relations, as well as my Juris Doctorate here at the law school. Diversification of the local economy has always been top of mind. I know for myself, my colleagues over the years, friends and family, but I did want to say we probably weren't as fancy and didn't use the word diversification. Probably known it by other names, perhaps not as action-oriented or positive. Earlier, Dr. Bond-Smith and Senator Wakai already referenced the book, right? The Price of Paradise, Lucky We Live Hawaii, ? And I also remember the term, the brain drain. I don't know if that's hip anymore, but that was from the 90s as well. The concept that local kids and folks, they perhaps couldn't afford to live in Hawaii, couldn't find jobs that were beyond tourism, perhaps. They had to move away and so forth. So this year actually marks the 30th anniversary of the 2-volume book that we mentioned, The Price of Paradise. And fast forwarding 30 years or 20 years, actually, some of us may recall campaigns such as the Buy Local, Hire Local campaigns. And I'm so glad to see that continuing. But more importantly, that we're perhaps reactivating this discussion, now calling it diversification, because frankly, with quite alarming news going on. We've got inflation, the stock market, the boomers. There's a lot. And how do we combat this? Most importantly, this panel today, I think, has offered solutions or action steps, action items as we move towards this diversification. And I'm convinced working together, maybe hard work, but working together, we can figure out a way or ways. I'd like to turn to actually Brittany Haid. She is the co-founder of Mana Up. Brittany, if you would tell us about yourself and Mana Up and what has been your experience in diversifying our economy.
Of course, thank you so much. And thank you also to the other panelists, as well as Senator Wakai and David Tomilowicz at Kaiser Permanente for their work in this area. We've been talking a lot today about things that we should do. And what I'm hoping, what I'll share with you is a little bit of a glimmer of a promise of what we can really build on. So Mana Up, we're a venture capital fund and accelerator program for Hawaii-based consumer products that are elevating the brand of Hawaii and who have the goal to expand globally. The foundation of why we started Mana Up is all around how do we look at companies that can not only start here, but can stay and thrive here. And to do that, we look at what is organically growing, what is community driven, and what's going to help bring new dollars into our state. We've had 74 companies go through our program. That includes our cohort 7, which we're in the midst of right now. That represents $63 million to the state of Hawaii and over 425 jobs. Almost half of this revenue is coming in from outside of Hawaii. So this is really showing that we're bringing new dollars into the state to grow and contribute to this diversification. Our annual growth rates, the average is above 50% year over year. So these companies are growing significantly. And these are the types of results that we really want to see. So we're really, really excited about that. So, this industry is a great promise for diversification. We have a lot more to go. 63 million is a start, but it's not even a fraction of what we want to see. So really building on that to increase that diversification, but also looking at how does this industry tie into tourism? How does it tie in for that global love for Hawaii, but not necessarily solely depend on it? In fact, in 2020, over half of the companies had their best revenue year yet, despite everything that was going on with tourism. So this is really tying into sustainable tourism, into support for diversified agriculture, as many of the companies are value-add food producers, and also the development of high-paying jobs that are in the more creative space, like marketing, growth management, finance, all of those more executive level jobs. So that's a little bit about what we're doing in terms of diversification.
Thank you, Brittany, for everything you and Mana Up do. Is there anything Hawaii residents and the government can help further diversify from your perspective for Mana Up and others like it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, recent successes that we've had have been in the world of e-commerce. So really growing the digital footprint of our companies here that take away that isolation factor that we were learning about earlier on in this event. So how do we really build on e-commerce and digital presence? The government can certainly help on providing a platform for our residents to learn more about that, to create education in this space, to create digital marketers, data analysts, all of these key skill sets that are really going to leverage growth in these areas, brand development, all of those types of things. I think things like the MAP grant are absolutely incredible. And I want to thank the people on this call who worked on that, of supporting manufacturing in Hawaii in a way that contributes to jobs. And I would just say, just also thinking about, things like, I know that DBED subsidized booths at Expo West last year, right, to help gain exposure for our Hawaii-based companies. I think things like that are just really great. And so I would support more things like that.
Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate that. Next, I'd like to turn to Bella. Aloha, Bella. Bella Hughes is Head of Mission and Innovation and co-founder of Shaka Tea, as well as co-founder of Hawaii Found Her. Bella, please tell us about yourself, Shaka Tea and Found Her. That's a mouthful, huh?
Good to see everybody here, and echoing Brittany, thanks for putting this together. I just came from judging a final round for the Empowered to Serve Business Accelerator for Hawaii by the American Heart Association. So just coming off that, literally the last half an hour, so inspired by all the innovation, all the potential in Hawaii. A little bit about myself, Shaka Tea. I think for a lot of folks, when you were born and raised in Hawaii in the 80s and 90s, like I was, you were hyper aware that a lot of the historic industries, big ag, was shifting off island, sugarcane, pineapple. My background is originally in nonprofit art and community leadership. I never thought I'd be a businesswoman, but a lot of my interest in really driving economic growth came from co-founding Hawaii Triennial, formerly Honolulu Biennial. So definitely want to do a shout out to the arts and culture community. To date, Hawaii Triennial has had well over $100 million economic impact by bringing in arts and cultural tourists to the state. But thinking about economic impact and all the opportunity Hawaii has, really led my husband and I to launch Shaka Tea, which is a line of sustainably sourced teas brewed with what we call our hero ingredient, mamaki, which is endemic to Hawaii. And we began to expand and experiment with other ingredients grown in Hawaii. What's really unique, I think, about the Shaka Tea model is we're shifting, I think, a lot of what traditionally we've heard in Hawaii, makes a Hawaii brand where everything is end-to-end manufactured there. We're really inspired by this more export vision. And, I learned that under King Kalakaua, one of our top exports was cauliflower, and how we can keep money in the hands of local farmers, but export off island with a daily usage occasion product. What, terrifies me is a lot of the products created in Hawaii cater to the super elite. Statistically, most Americans do not have $1,000 in their case there's an emergency. So if Hawaii continues to be really focused on a super premium audience, there's a lot of people focused on that audience. What really gets me excited is how do we focus on lightweight hero ingredients, teas, spices that can be grown with farmers that have a 1/4 acre to 20 acres, manufactured to the dry material, and then ship it off island and reach much larger markets, and then have products that everybody can afford, whether you're at Walmart to Whole Foods. So that's a big thing that we are championing at Shaka Tea. We are headquartered in Hilo. We were recently acquired by Irresistible Foods Groups, which is the parent company of King's Hawaiian. They've got a deep commitment to our mission and our vision, so excited to continue to grow with them. We're in over 20,000 doors to date. And then concurrently, at the start of the pandemic, co-founded an accelerator focused specifically on the needs of API and Native Hawaiian women. Women only get 2% of all venture capital out there. There is no data on API and Indigenous women. On day one of our accelerator, which is run through Purple Maia, we actually give each and every woman a $20,000 non-dilutive grant. Our cohort 1 created 12 jobs, and we also give a $4,000 kupuna and keiki credit, which was very much inspired by my experience and my co-founder Gloria Lau. Both of us are mothers, wanting to ensure, again, equitable access for women, mothers, and caretakers at the table. So that's a little bit about me and what I do.
Thank you, Bella. Same question that I posed to Brittany, Bella, not to put you on the spot, but what could we as citizens and government do to help diversify from your point of view?
Well, I think the arts are obviously, that's my background. I think that's something very distinctive and special. You can have artists. Contemporary art is a multi-billion-dollar market, 6+ billion. It's something that local artists can create in Hawaii. And just as we're seeing support with the government coming in and helping subsidize trade shows, there are major art fairs. Our talents are tremendous. So that would be a really wonderful step if we could have Hawaii artists showing at Art Basel, for instance. And there's, a dozen major art art fairs or more. On the agriculture end, we all know food security is a huge issue. So if we start being comfortable with talking about hero ingredients, a lot of them, mamaki turmeric, which is a global commodity, can be grown polycrop style in concert with local foods for food security, ship that lightweight material off island and put a lot more money in. So I think those are the two areas from my own experience that I'm really passionate about.
Thank you, Bella. And I'm so glad you mentioned art. Senator Wakai, in the chat earlier, one of our audience members had asked if you would mind renaming your 3A plan to the 4A plan, adding the fourth A as art. Let me open up the floor to the other panelists. Maybe we can focus on how, same question. How can we as Hawaii residents, those who aren't business owners per se, what can we do to help support diversification of the economy? This is for all panelists. Feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in really quick. I think what you can do is be relevant, because all too often, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're a seasoned business person, you just think that things that go on in government are we're untouchable somehow. It's complicated. I don't understand the process. But unless you get engaged, we will continue to have the meager resources into the business sector. I mean, I give a lot of credit to Mark and Wayne for all the work that they do. But do you know the DBED budget? I mean, our state budget is $17 billion. DBED's budget is less than 1% of the entire state budget. That's a problem to me. That to me is a societal problem, because we're not prioritizing economic development. We want to give teachers raises. We want to have better roads. We want to have a new prison. All of those come at an expenditure cost, and that's at the taxpayers as well as the business sector. But we don't put enough money into growing the business sector to pay for all of these other government services. So to all of those who are listening here, don't just listen passively to all that was presented today. There's golden opportunities. But for us to get and effectuate all of those opportunities, it's going to take a concerted effort, collaboration by all of us to make sure that Mark Ritchie and Wayne and their colleagues at DBED get the proper funding to grow the economy, to help every single one of you on this call become even larger businesses in the future.
Thank you, Senator Wakai. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I think, well, thank you very much, Senator Wakai, for saying that. Also, Stephen and I had a conversation last week, and maybe I could put Stephen on the spot just in terms of government intervention, kind of market failure, how you see the role of government trying to diversify the economy, and intervening from an economist's point of view.
Sure. I'll first address the initial question around what can ordinary people do. So a lot of the analysis that I talked about, I described it as for businesses because that's who the audience is, but really these sort of lessons I think apply to everybody. So you can do this type of analysis also around jobs. And it's important to realize that jobs are not a one-way street. It's not just that an employer creates a job and hires somebody that's perfect for that. It's that it tends to go both ways. The jobs are created around people's skills and vice versa. And so if ordinary people think about their own skills and what types of skills can be useful in this economy, they can also think about how not just catering to the economy currently as it is, but being more forward-looking about what types of skills are going to be needed in the future that are related to the existing set of industries that are in Hawaii. So if they want to remain living in Hawaii, they need to, focus on the particular areas that are likely to emerge in the future. And then the jobs that get created around that are based on both the skills of the labor force that are here and the needs of those businesses. In terms of thinking about what the government can do, it's really important that governments don't pick winners, that they're not picking that winning firm, they're not just giving a big grant to a company and saying go, but that they address more specifically the things that businesses use, the components that make up those products. And so those components can be things that are used by many businesses. They're not necessarily just used by one business. So there may be some particular facility which is missing in Hawaii. And I gave the example of the convention center. So if we wanted to have business and convention travel, we needed a convention center back in the 90s, and they built that. But it doesn't mean that that convention center was awarded to one hotel or one company. It became something that facilitated lots of different types of conventions that could visit Hawaii. And so it's looking for lots of these types of initiatives where there's some missing element, and that element is missing because of some kind of market failure. There's a compatibility, there's a coordination problem, or some type of externality that it's missing. And these types of coordination problems tend to occur a lot more in these small economies. So for a very large economy, for a very large city like Los Angeles or New York, a lot of these sort of things will emerge on their own from the market, but the market's not necessarily going to provide those in a really small marketplace. They need a first mover, and that first mover might be the government. And they could have a plan then to, say, build a convention center. For a while, they would host that convention center. At some point, that becomes a marketplace that is self-sustaining, and that convention center can continue to run even without the hands of government. And in that longer-term plan, even those initiatives will be profitable. It is not that those things are government pouring money into something, that there's going to be a continual loss. It's that can be transferred just in order to, that can be initiated in order to start that market that doesn't yet exist here. But it's about figuring out exactly what those barriers are, what's missing that prevents these new activities that build on what we're already good at in order to develop.
I see. Thank you, Professor Bond-Smith. Actually, Leslie, I have a question for you. Earlier, you talked about clusters. How can the regular person get involved, and when would that be? And what else can the government do to support that when it's ready?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that generous question. I really appreciate it. So community engagement is essential. Right now, all of your communities are working on their SEDS. I suggest you reach out to your local economic development board, and we're doing surveys as well as focus groups, and we're just about to begin the state process, all of which we are stakeholders in. Then we're on a short deadline. This document will be published. It has to be done by August 31st. We will then do much promotion of it, dissemination of it, and we're hopeful that, in fact, we're going to invest in it. People take ownership of the various strategies that have been identified by our community on how to strengthen our other clusters and strengthen our economy, and actually invest, benchmark, look at our progress, so that in 2027, we're going to be measuring progress between those intervening years to see how we're moving the dial. If something isn't working, do we redeploy resources? So I think engagement, get involved, look for the document as it will be published in your respective community with your community one as well as the state one. Take ownership of a piece of it, and make sure we're all investing together and coordinated to move it forward. And don't let it be a document that collects dust on a shelf that we checked off a box with EDA so we can get EDA funding.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate that. Brittany, earlier you mentioned out-of-state funding. Provocative question perhaps is support from off-island. What can businesses and investors who are off-island do to support diversification and resilience of Hawaii?
That's a great question. Well, I have a great example with Whole Foods, being a company that's not based in Hawaii, that has contributed to our diversification. So Mana Up has been working with Whole Foods over the last several years to help the local product companies get into Whole Foods and really validate their products in the local Hawaii market. Well, through that, many of them have done super well, and they've been able to expand to other regions within the continent. That has drastically increased revenue for them and bringing those dollars back into Hawaii and supporting their manufacturing. So I would say that's one great example. You know, there are other investors like King's Hawaiian who have invested in our local economy, which is incredible. And I think, you know, pointing out, you know, Shaka Tea and everything they did is a great example of what collaboration can look like when, you know, we're utilizing our resources here, but also utilizing resources that are not here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brittany. We've got maybe a couple more minutes. Bella, same question for you. What are your thoughts on what off-island businesses and investors may be able to do to support diversification?
Well, I think locally investors need to get a lot more comfortable to move away from real estate. I think, typical Hawaii, if you want to make money, you invest in real estate. So, my hats are off to the local investors Shakati was able to get. We had some really incredible, and, frankly, I'd call them revolutionary angel investors that believed in this vision, that really enabled us to start growing off island. The old adage, again, my expertise is really consumer goods, is you need to stay in your home market till you hit a certain size and scale to expand off island. Unfortunately, just due to sheer population size and the level of local products competing against each other, those numbers and metrics that continental-based serious CPG investors look for are not realistic to ever achieve in Hawaii. And very early on, Shakati was told, oh, you'll only be successful in Hawaii or maybe the West Coast. And we need to prove out that like the brand could work across the nation. That being said, going back to the government question, I think one of the critical needs is, obviously clusters with, on the ag end, manufacturing, which is something I deal with Shaka Tea and processing tea. But the other thing is, what about a national broker support for Hawaii products? Because the earlier Hawaii products can show they have great velocity data, not only in Hawaii, not only in the West Coast, but across the nation, the more opportunity there's going to be for them to raise additional capital from off island, as well as expand and grow larger businesses that will hopefully in turn put more money back into the local economy.
Thank you, Bella. And I see Dr. Bondsmith's hand up. Yes, Dr. Bondsmith.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on both Brittany and Bella's comments. So I think what's really nice about that Whole Foods example is that national distribution is or even commercializing locally, is perhaps a capability that was missing. But by Mana partnering with Whole Foods to then provide that service to their clients, that created that capability for these Hawaii businesses to expand. So that's an example of something which is one of these capabilities, and it may be government that steps in and provides one of those capabilities, or it can be some sort of industry group or an angel investor such as Mana. The thing is, I think it's really important that we look for examples of things that are going to be unique to Hawaii, that allow those businesses to remain in Hawaii. Because often when you have, say, foreign investors coming in, they'll buy up a business that quickly moves away. So there are a lot of examples of startup Hawaii that moved away within 5 or 6 years because they get a foreign investor and it becomes better for that business to be located in San Francisco than to remain in Hawaii. Really, we need to focus on businesses that are always going to find Hawaii to be the best location for them to be, even once they get that external investor. And so I think Shaka Tea is a really great example of this because it uses a bunch of unique characteristics or capabilities that are based in Hawaii that brand couldn't be based anywhere else. It wouldn't be that brand anymore if it was based anywhere else. So I think
we do have more employees off island. Just to interject here, like I think having multiple offices, that's where it goes back to the ag. Just to interject here is really critical. But like to grow and expand, like our sales team, the way we really make money is like selling in all 50 states. So just I think it's about going back to the ag. Like what are the special things? Those are the hero ingredients, and you can be based there, but then like you will have to naturally set up offices all over.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, the core of the business is still going to be here. It's about those uniquely Hawaii.
Totally headquartered in Hilo. Exactly.
It wouldn't be Shaka Tea if that was grown in another state. So that's a business that can stay here, that will remain here indefinitely, even once it gets sort of external investors and external capabilities. And so it's really important to look for these types of capabilities and products that are less mobile, that are more likely to remain in Hawaii for the long term. And those are the ones which really need that support. That's what's going to generate diversification, because otherwise we'll be putting in support for these types for startups and so on, which is a fine thing to do, but it's not going to promote diversification when those businesses leave and still leave Hawaii totally concentrated on tourism.
That's a great point. Thank you so much. That we not only create an environment right, for startups, but that we find we're unique. We know we're unique, but stay unique and leverage off of that. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I do wish we had more time, and I'd love a second series perhaps, but I'll turn the floor back to Anna Marie. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sean. You are such a wonderful moderator, so dynamic and so engaging. We appreciate you being part of this. And to all of our panelists and speakers for your dynamic and innovative ideas in bringing more resilience to our small businesses through policy, through community economic development, through more research, through the resources and support systems that you provide, as well as serial entrepreneurs and experienced business owners, the insights that you have that can be parlayed into the whole small business ecosystem. This has been such a wonderful event, and we can't thank you enough for making time, extending your availability to continue this discussion. And I agree, Sean, I think we can definitely have a part 2 or 3 or even 4 to this. I'm sure we'd love to have, especially with our small businesses here, follow-ups to a lot of these moving pieces that are in process. Folks, as a reminder, please save the dates for our upcoming ICCC Intercity Capital Connections Hawaii programming happening on August 16th and 18th. We'd love to encourage you to apply, nominate businesses, and get them plugged into a wide network of small businesses, both on the islands as well as across our markets in the US as well as Canada. And we're going to pop in the links here for these nomination and application processes, but we will also follow up. If you have any questions of us, of our speakers, please do reach out. We'll also send you the follow-up materials, including the recording of this discussion today. Thank you. Mahalo to our wonderful expert speakers who came here today and joined us and again, dropped these wonderful insights. Sean, Professor Stephen Bond-Smith, Brittany Hyde, Bella Hughes, Wayne Layugan, Mark Ritchie, Leslie Wilkins, and of course, Senator Glenn Wakai. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Be energized, be well, and I hope to see you August 16th and 18th. Take care, everybody.